So the title of the talk is Small Grains, Production and Profitability for Organic Systems. The title of the talk should be Oats, okay, Production and Profitability for Organic Systems. And I'm going to show you why that is in just a little bit, all right? So I'm an agronomist, and I'm starting to be an agronomist. So the logical place for me to start is to give you all a history lesson. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Iowa, okay? This is Iowa in 1929. All right, this is Iowa through the years from 1929 to 2009, okay? This is the percent of total planted area, all right, 100%. Let's look at what we got here. So corn. We can see over time we really haven't changed how much of the surface area in Iowa has been covered with corn, all right? We plant a ton of corn, right? 20 plus million acres sometimes, okay? What used to be a big part of Iowa and most of the upper Midwest were these two things, small grains and foraged legumes, right? We raised more livestock outside, all right? We had a use for those products. This is what the landscape used to look like. All right, what is this green monster growing here and engulfing the landscape? Soybean, right? Things have really changed with the introduction of soybean, right? We don't have to grow our own nitrogen in the same way. We can limit the amount of crops we grow. You can have less machine, far more acres, right? We know that's what happened. We know that may not be a good thing, okay? And again, you can also see even more drastic change because of the biotech era. So we've got this change in cropping systems as a function of history, all right? Let's take a look at those small grains. What's included in that? All right, so this is harvested small grain acreage in Iowa over time. All right, this is barley acreage. Harvested rye acreage, and this is harvested wheat acreage. All right, so we've got millions of acres here, and this is 1866, the first NAS census, all the way through this. All right, this barley one ends in 1970, 1866 to 1986 for rye. It's not doesn't even register anymore, and for wheat we have really a pittance of acreage anymore. Okay, under 10,000. All right. Anyone know what's happening in America from about 1922 to 1930 where we might want a lot more rye and barley?
Prohibition.
Prohibition. People were getting a lot more drunk back then. They were using local grains to get drunk. Maybe that's part of the success of what we can do with small grains in the future. I thought that was kind of cool. All right? Like I said, this is coming from NAS numbers. All right, now here's my baby. This is the crop I work with all the time. This is harvested oat acreage in Iowa. All right? Let's take a closer look at what's going on. 1950, we've got 6.5 million acres of oats in Iowa. All right, that's just planted acres, right? If you think of how much forage and pasture was in Iowa back then, it's over 20% of the total surface area of the state. Okay, where are we at in 2010? 57,000 acres. Last year was about 55,000. Right? That's about the same amount that we have in prairie plantings in Iowa. Okay, to give some comparison. All right, so acreage has been reduced from 20% to 0.02% of the Iowa landscape. All right, this is a 100-fold reduction over 66 years. All right, so it's like almost an extinction of sorts. All right, so organic farmers, that's you guys. That's who's left around still growing these crops. Why do we grow these crops? Let's think about that. All right, there's grain that we can sell or we can feed. We can mill it. We can do all these different things with it. All right. There's straw, bedding material, organic material that if we leave it on the soil surface there, right? But then there's these other things that happen in the small grains year that they allow for, right? There's forages and green manures. Look at that nice, thick stand of red clover, right? That's almost as important, if not more important sometimes, than the actual oats and straw, all right? And then we got weed suppression. I'm not going to get into weed science because we have an expert in the room. I don't want to embarrass myself. But look at this skip. Right? In that skip, you can see all that foxtail coming up. If you don't plant that small grain, this is what you get. So we can see all the multiple benefits of these crops, right? And farmers are aware of this. But look, this is the beauty of that small grains year. You've got this lush vegetative cover with the clover. Got the crop there almost ready to go in mid-July, right? Farmers know why that they plant small grains. And let's think about some of these are quotes from farmers that I've worked with over the last few years. First and foremost, is the easiest and fastest way to get away from the corn and soybean alternation It allows you to distribute your labor load a little bit if you're going to be harvesting in July. And then again, it allows you to plant your cover crops in July instead of having to wait until late fall. Soil building, getting something else growing on that soil, something more diverse growing in that soil, something with deeper roots, something with shallow roots, something with tap roots, something with fibrous roots, something different than the corn or soybean roots. That would help to not only the soil health, but the soil livestock, help regenerate our soil. Right? More farmers quote, small grains benefit my operations by spreading my workload for planting and harvest, giving me income in the off season, cutting my crop expenses, as small grains don't cost as much to grow, opening a wider window to allow for better use of cover crops for soil building and better use of the land. 10 months with something growing rather than 5 months with corn. All right? And there's this last one. We love small grains for everything except the price and the profit. They're great for soil health, soil aggregate stability. The small grains rooting system really helps improve over several cycles of the rotation. Helps improve the soil. It gives us an opportunity to get a legume in there, to get more nitrogen fixation. It's all a plus. We like it a lot. It helps distribute labor. They're planted before corn and soybeans, harvested midsummer, right? Plus, plus, plus. There's just that one big minus. What is that big minus? Well, let's think about the crops we grow. Right? And right now, this is not very concrete. This is kind of the reality as far as getting a price for that crop. Right? Corn is still pretty good. Things are getting a little wacky now with imports, but organic corn is still pretty steady. Soybeans have been staying pretty strong. Small grains aren't really worth that much, right? From a monetary standpoint. Okay? So let's think about the factors that actually go into this. So what factors influence production and profitability? So I think there's two distinct categories. There's biophysical factors and socioeconomic factors. And they work together. Okay? Biophysical, we've got the climate. How much sunshine and rain do we get and when do we get it? All right? The soil fertility, how much NP and K and the other things do we need and do we have? How good are our plant stands? What are populations like? Are they adequate? Right? Where are small grains fitting into rotations? And what varieties are we using? What's the genetic basis of our yield? Socioeconomic factors. How much experience do farmers have growing small grains? Are they as good now as they used to be? We'll talk about that. Markets. Do we have markets? There's food grade markets. Those are hard to get into, right? Are there that many organic feed grade markets for small grains? Not quite there. Livestock, right? That changes the picture if you can feed a small grain, right? And then perceptions. What we think about what we're doing shapes what we're doing. We want to talk about that. All right? So I broke those down into categories like this. We got to scratch some things out. Some things I can't control. I can't control that. I wish I could. We all wish we could control that because it affects everything more than anything else, but we can't control it. I put a yellow there. We have a little control in the organic system, right? Because it's still supply and demand. We're not dealing with futures and crazy financial instruments, right? We still have a little say in what we do and how much we make for our products. All right? This is what I'm interested in changing and looking at. Because I'm an agronomist, right? I want to know how agronomic practices affect yield and profitability. Okay? So this is the first experiment we did. It's called an observational study. All right? There's no treatments. We just go out and we observed what farmers were doing. We took baseline measurements of different things. All right? That's all. We wanted to see what was going on, what's small grains growing like in Iowa. All right? So over 2 seasons, I drove around 3 visits at each of these 41 farms, all over Iowa. All right? I drove 50,000 miles just in Iowa over 2 years. It's a lot of driving. All right? Northeast, northwest, southeast, and southwest quadrants. What does that look like? Oh, these were the questions we were looking for. All right? What small grains are grown? What small grains follow in rotations? Right? Is fertility adequate? Right? What are average yield and test weight? What are seeding rates and seeding dates? Right? And what do farmers think about production constraints? All right? So this is what the experiment looked like in 2014 and 2015 over those 2 seasons. Right? You can see the distribution of growers that we attempted to visit over the whole state to get a good, clear picture of what small grains production was like. All right? In blue, up there, we've got 2 guys growing triticale. You can see oats all over the place. Rye is in red. Winter wheat in green. Right? Barley up there in the northwest or northeast and the north central. And just a little touch of spring wheat as well. All right? Is everyone hearing me on that side as well? Okay. And what does that look like? All right, so this is why I study oats. Because the people I work for and with, they grow oats right now. Do I think other small grains are really viable and potentially good for Iowa? I do. Right now, I think this is where we're at, though. So I'm going to talk about oats. All right? What are oats following in the rotation? All right? So about half the guys are following soybean, which I think is a smart move. All right? We can talk about that later if you want. But still, 40% of the growers are following a corn crop. All right? With oats, I think that's maybe okay, but let's talk about that. Why not plant a small grain after corn? All right? We're talking about more residue, right? That corn residue is light colored, right? It reflects the sun. It's keeping that soil a pretty cool temp, so things aren't warming up as fast. All right? Which means later planting date for small grains, that's not good. And I'll show you why in just a little bit. All right? Lots of residue means nitrogen mineralization may be inhibited. All right? When you put a lot of cellulose and a lot of trash into the soil, right? Those microbes want to eat that up. And they're going to hold on to that nitrogen that's in their body because they need to metabolize all that carbon that they're eating. All right? That's another good reason. Another big one, if you're growing wheat, do not follow corn. You're in for some serious problems. No one in here uses fungicide, which means you're even more really at a disadvantage. All right, so corn is an alternate host for this disease called fusarium, which is scab. All right? It's toxic to humans and livestock. If you're trying to sell a food-grade product, right, it's very, very challenging. All right? Terrible for wheat growing. I would say get rid of that practice altogether if you're growing wheat after corn. Rethink your rotation. Okay, let's go over some basics. Nutrient removal for oats, just to refresh ourselves. This is all freely accessible on our ISU extension, right? That's PAM 1688. If you have questions about this at the end, you can ask me and I can get it to you. All right, oats, right? We're talking about 1 bushel, all right? About 1/3 a pound of P2O5, right? And about 2/10 of a pound of K2O, all right? But let's look at this oat straw, okay? 6.4 pounds in a ton. We're moving 36 pounds of K2O, okay? Right? So if we're thinking about managing this crop with some thought and putting a little bit more into it, right? Even at optimum levels, we're adding a little bit of P and we're adding a little K, right? Something to think about, right? Those are those application rates, okay? A lot of us are using livestock manures. We may be in that high range, which may not necessitate the use of supplemental fertility, but it's something to think about, all right? And this is what we found with those 41 producers, right? So in red here is the percentage of growers below the optimum threshold for phosphorus, right? And then the same thing for K. All right, so we had 20% of our growers were below that optimum threshold to produce a good crop, right? And it was even more so for potassium, okay? Again, we want to know how are growers comparing to baseline values. All right, let's talk about the thing that's most important. Let's talk about yield and test weight. All right, look at that range. Look at that yield range. Does anyone find that a little shocking? Do we see that same kind of range in corn production in Iowa, even in organic systems? That 5-fold plus difference, right? That said something to me. That was really shocking when I saw that after the first 2 years, right? Test weight's a different story. That's a tough one. We can talk about that more. All right, but we've got these median values, right? It's about 90 bushels an acre for oats over those 40 growers, which is a lot higher than actually the state average. All right, and we got about 35.5 pounds per bushel at that test weight. Okay? Let's talk a little bit more about test weight. All right, so this red line here at the top, that's 36 pounds per bushel. That is the threshold to sell a food-grade product at grain millers in St. Ansgar, Iowa. All right? Can you sell a crop at a lower test weight? Yeah, you can. You're also going to get discounted. Okay? You can see of these oat producers, how many are actually above that line? It's not many guys, right? Test weight's it's a tough thing. All right, so we can see in 2014, the mean test weight. We see that big old range. Weather was really crazy and diseases were really crazy in 2014. All right, we can see in 2015, Where there was a little bit better, we pick up a pound. Okay? Farmers are well aware of this test weight issue, and I know anyone in this room that grows a small grain is also aware of that, right? This is what we asked them, what's really holding you back? They said, I'm not having a market for test weight, right? Oats need to be at least 36 pounds. If not, no one wants them. Very hard to sell light oats. Light test weight, right? Is there anything we can do to improve test weight? I think there is. I don't have miracles for you, but I have some basic trends that we're going to show. We'll get to that in a few slides. Seeding rates. This is the other thing. 1.75 to 5 bushels an acre. Is anyone surprised by that spread? That's a big spread, right? What does this say about small grains production in Iowa? I don't want to insult farmers. I'm not insulting farmers. There's varied goals, right? Some guys are trying to produce grain. Some want straw. Some want the forage and the green manure, right? For some guys, the forage and the alfalfa is way more important than the oats. So you throw out what you got and you go for it, right? Okay. Guys at U of M that do organic research in small grains, this is what they're recommending. I'm not recommending bushels or pounds here. I'm recommending a population to you. All right? How many of us in here plant based on a population? Okay. Something to think about. Okay. How do we do this? A little math. Never hurt anyone, right? We all do this little back-of-the-envelope calculation. No problem. All right? Got the seeding rate, pounds per acre. So you pick your desired stand. Right? 1.2, whatever it may be. Right? You divide that, 1 minus expected stand loss. You get your seeds per pound and your percent seed germination. Let me give an example of what that might look like. So if my desired stand is 1.2 million plants, I'm thinking I'm going to lose about 10% of my stand, maybe to a crust or to other things, right? I've got about 12,500 seeds per pound. Germinations at 95%. I'm seeding 112 pounds per acre. All right? I'm not saying right now go out and seed 112 pounds per acre. I'm saying this is a way of doing it. Okay? Again, this is coming from a risk management guideline from the University of Minnesota, specifically catered toward organic production. I've just made your life about 100 times easier. If you go to this website, this is from Canada. Thank you, our northern neighbors. I know we have one member here, right? It's a free, usable thing, right? Does everyone have a smartphone or a way of accessing a computer? Okay, for the most part, right? This is what this is doing, okay? All you need to do is you put in your desired plant density, right? Let's say it's 28 plants per square foot, right? Your germination rate from the seed tag, or what you're assuming. Emergence mortality, we said 10%. The row spacing on your drill. The only thing you have to do, 1,000 kernel weight. In the winter, you're hanging out, you're not really that busy, on your kitchen table, split it up with your wife or a kid, count out 1,000 seeds, and weigh them. I've done it probably 24 times now all around Iowa with different growers. It takes all of 5 minutes, and I think it's a bit of a game changer, right? So you plug that number in, and this is what you get. It's pretty amazing, the feedback. Let's look at this. I know it's hard to see. It's telling you exactly what to do. Seed 106.9 pounds of oats per acre to obtain 28 live plants per square foot, right? This tells you how many, the travel, how many you get in a linear foot, gives you all that information. All right? To seed 20 acres, you need this many pounds. At 40 cents a pound, this is how much it's going to cost you. All right? So we've been trying to get growers to use free and easy-to-use tools like this. All right? I have a resources page at the very end that I'll put up that's got all this information. All right? So I wanted to test this population idea on farm, in a farm setting with farmers. All right? So we did it. All right? It's a 3-treatment trial. So, all right? Farmers planted 3 strips. Right? 5 repetitions. Farmers helped us out with this. Right? In 2015, we had 2 guys growing Sabre oats. And in 2016, we had someone growing Shelby 427s. All right? So the plot sizes are field scale plot sizes, right? They're 500 foot long by 20 foot wide. All right? Again, 2 sites in 2015, 1 in 2016. Right? And the farmers are doing the math on this, and they're figuring out what they have to do. And they're plugging it in, they're calibrating their drills, right? And they're seeding those things for us. All right? So you guys want to know the results of what actually happened with all this, right? That's why we're here. Okay? If you see the same letter everywhere, it means there's no difference. The treatments are the same. Okay? So I've got bushels of acres here, right here, on this axis, the y-axis, going vertical. All right? And we've got the 3 different farmers. Okay? There's not only like almost no statistical difference, there's almost no numerical difference there, right? No difference in the treatments, from 22 up to 36 plants per square foot. Why should you care then? Why am I even doing this? Okay? This is why. Right? It's different how much you're putting into it. For the same yield, someone's paying $26.66 up to $43.29. All right? So a little thinking can go a little way towards saving you a little bit money per acre. I'm not saying it's, again, a cure-all, but putting a little thought into small grains production can save you some money and make them a more profitable endeavor. Okay? Seed cost differences. Right? And our farmers, they liked this. They were interested in this. This is one of the farmers in the study. He said, there's quite a bit of variance in seed size in oats. Knowing that, I found I would probably save some money if I made a practice of figuring out how many seeds there are in a pound and using that as a planting basis rather than bushels per acre. Okay? It can vary your planting rate quite a bit if you don't know exactly how many seeds per pound you have. It's something I'll put into practice in the coming years. It's definitely worthwhile. Right? I'm obviously happy when I see this stuff because it means that we're working together and doing something right. Okay? So we tested this, like I said, also on small plots. So at Iowa State University, believe it or not, we do have some organic research going on amid everything else. Right? So we're doing this on small plots. The plots are 10 by 60. I'm using a really small Almaco cone-type drill. All right? And I'm hand harvesting these numbers. All right? What I want to show is just the trends more than the relative numbers. Okay? So we tested 4 populations instead of 3. So we went from 15, 22, 29, and 36 plants per square foot. So we get a little bit bigger range, a little bit more of a low. And we also tested 3 dates. Right? It's called a split plot experiment. We replicate this 5 times so it's statistically robust. Right? So if we're going to see differences, we're going to see them. Okay? How about yield times population? Remember again, different letters mean that the yields are different. Okay? So if we looked last year, no difference in those populations. Not that different than what we found on farm, right? Okay? 2015 was a little different. We see this kind of peak, this optimal number, which was somewhere around 22 plants per square foot. Okay? Again, something to think about. Right? And you can see the effects of environment are strong and they're serious. Right? In 2015, I've got yields here that are like 45 bushels an acre. I got to say, that's pretty lame. That's not very good oat yields. Right? 2016, not doing anything really that different. Right? We've got bushels upwards of 90. Right? So I understand how much climate plays a factor in this. Right? But what we want to do is optimize our systems, at least economically. All right? And again, let's look at the economic ramifications of these decisions, right? So these are the different populations that we sowed, all right? And this is economic returns. I'm not factoring in labor or tillage or any of that, right? This is just the cost of the grain minus how much we spend on seed, right? What I'm trying to show is the relative differences between those treatments, all right? So we can see, again, we're kind of at this optimal economic optimal around 22 plants per square foot. Remember, you can go back to that calculator. You can put in 22, and you can give that a go and see if it works. Okay? All right. What about seeding date? All right, so again, we had farmers in that big observational study from down about Missouri border all the way up to Minnesota. So we're going to see a big spread in seeding dates. So we saw April 2nd to April 21st, right? Okay? How much of a difference does seeding date make? This is even more important than the population stuff. This is the most important thing when it comes to growing spring cereals. Absolutely. All right? So remember, we had 4 populations, and we had 3 dates. So in 2015, right, we planted as early as we can get in. 2015, that was the first date was April 6th, second was April 17th, and the third was April 28th. In 2017, or 2016 rather, the first date is March 22nd, going to April 4th, and then April 15th. So we tried to have a week and a half spread. It didn't work always. We're working with weather just like you guys would be. All right? But the point is we want to think about a really early, a mid, and then a late planting and look at the differences of those. Okay? And this is what it looks like. Look at date 1, right? In mid-May. I've got a nice crop going. I've got those leaves out there. They're photosynthesizing, suppressing weeds, right? We're soaking up those nitrates. We're doing our job as Iowa farmers, right? Look at date 2. Not quite as much. And date 3 is kind of a wash. It's not really doing much for us. What does that look like later in the season? Look at that right in the middle. Those crops are a week away from being harvested, right before it starts to get real hot. All right? Day 2, again, not quite ready. And date 3 is lagging behind. All right? So visually, we can see how different those planting dates are and how they make a big impact on yield. Right? Even a day or two can make a big impact. What does that look like numerically? Okay. I forgot about this. I wanted to do a little botany lesson. I'm still a student, so I like to share nerdy stuff. All right. Does anyone know what this is right here? Yeah, right. That's an oat grain, the chaff. And I've got, there it is. Okay. So that's the anther. That's the pollen of that oat plant. It's the male part. I don't want to get into it too much. I don't want anyone blushing, but right, that's the male part of the plant. It's going to pollinate and make that kernel. Okay? So the heat stress at this point at pollination is called anthesis, right? This is going to reduce your potential yield more than any other stage, okay? Tailoring, jointing, any of those other stages. This is the most sensitive time, right? That male part is real sensitive, all right? What this means, right? When you knock those out, you're just reducing the total number of seeds that can form, right? Limiting the offspring, okay? Late season heat stress due to delayed planting, what does that mean? A shorter filling period, right? It means lower test weight potential. Remember this. We can push things a little. We can really push it. Oats can germinate and grow between 36 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, right? That's a lot colder than corn and beans, right? We can get in the fields maybe even a lot earlier than I think we can. All right? What does this look like? Okay? In 2015, I get this drop. It's more precipitous, right? I can see that with every 10 days, I'm losing a lot. And what this looks like in 2015 is we're losing about a bushel a day yield potential. 50? All right. And then in 2016, we can see it's not quite as bad because we're pushed back, right? We're planting much earlier. Okay? How about test weight? 2015, we can see I'm planting later. Test weight's dropping fast as I get pushed back into the season. All right? 2016, it's stable. What's happening? I just told you that the earlier you plant, the higher their test weight is. What's going on in 2016? Weather. All right? Plants are starting off good, 2016, right? An inch more rain, more heat units. What happens in June? 2015, I got 7 inches of rain in June. 2016, 1. Climate. All right? It'd be even worse if we planted even later. Right? And here's these returns. If this isn't a good reason to plant early, I don't know what is. Date 1, economic returns. Date 2, date 3, right? This is the biggest gap. This is what we want to be focused on. All right? Planting earlier, thinking about a population. Variety. It's another big thing. We'll run out of time a little. I did want to say, though, these Shelbys, right? So Shelby, Reeves, Jerry, Horsepower, Newberg, Sabre. These were the varieties that we found the most of in that 2-year study. All right? And when you're looking at a variety trial, you want to look at when it was released. You want to look at crown rust and stem rust resistance. And you want to look at kernel color for millers. Millers want a white kernel. If you're feeding it, you can do whatever you want. Okay? So if we're looking for different crops to give us a good disease resistance, remember, so S here is susceptible, MS moderately susceptible, MR moderately resistant, and R resistant. All right? When you're selecting an oat for crown rust, you don't want to be picking something that's really below MR or R. Right? Rust is a big deal. This is what rust looks like, right? It starts off like that, barely visible, right? can see, and then it can totally decimate a crop. It will ruin your crop, absolutely, right? Since we're not using fungicides in organic systems, you really got to think about what you can do. And that means picking good genetics, all right? Right? Do we have the right varieties here in the Midwest? I don't totally know. What I do want to say is if you're in the Dakotas, you still have a breeder up there. He's doing active work, right? If you're in Wisconsin, there's a breeder at Wisconsin. Iowa, we don't have a breeder, so we're going to look to Illinois and places like the Dakotas and Minnesota, all right? This is the other thing I want to say. When you're selecting an oat, don't just look last year and say, oh, this one did better than this one. Look back, do your homework. Look back at 3 years, right? And say to yourself, how is that doing over 3 years? How's resistance over 3 years? How's yield and test weight over 3 years? Make sure you're doing your homework on that. There's lots of other factors to consider, right? Field cultivation, disking versus cultivating versus harrowing. Cultipacking. I think it makes a lot of sense to cultipack before you plant, actually, right? What you want to do is you want to plant to a nice, firm seed bed that's like that, right? When you harrow a field, the field's kind of like this, right? When you plant it to something that's even, you're getting even distribution of those seeds. When you plant into ridges, you're getting seeds at 1 inch. You're getting seeds at 3 inches, right? We want to think about that. Harvesting method, we'll go into that in a minute. Seed cleaning, right? If you got a gravity table or a clipper or a fanning mill, you can turn that 34-pound oat into a 36-pound oat that you can now get into a food-grade market, right? So we want to think about these things, how we can add value on our farms to these small grains, right? There's lots of practices. What works good for one farmer may not work for another farmer. Worth thinking about, however. Okay. How are farmers doing it? So we found that, half the guys are direct cutting. About 40% of them are swathing. We got 10% still doing stuff like this, right? Work with a lot of Amish growers in Kelowna, hardworking guys that are doing it the old school way. I got a lot of respect, all right? Something to think about. But the science of harvesting, that's a different thing, right? Okay? So if we're talking about wheat, barley, triticale, rye, this seed head is called a spike. If we're talking about oats, it's called the panicle. Just a seed head, these are fancy names that I use because I'm a nerdy scientist, right? Okay? This area under the seed head is called the peduncle. It's the stem. It's going to make sense in a minute, I promise. Right? And these glooms here, right, that's just the chaff. Right? But it's important to know these things so we can make educated decisions about when we harvest. Right? So dry weight, your yield is not going to increase after physiological maturity. What does physiological maturity mean to me when I'm looking out at a field of oats or wheat or whatever? Right? It means that this area right here, it's tan or brown. Right? It means that 75% of this area, the glooms, are dried down and they've got that nice creamy color. Right? They've lost, most of their green. All right? So the grain at that point, it could still be at 35+% moisture. That's not a big deal. Right? The other thing is if you're swathing, anyone that swaths out here, right? A lot of that plant is green from there down. That's not a big deal, right? 20 to 30% moisture, that's when you want to start for swathing. It may be earlier than you guys think. I found a lot of growers that I think are waiting too long, all right? Direct combining. Anyone that doesn't here, you're not going to combine a green crop. Everyone knows that. You're going to ruin your machinery. I don't need to tell you guys that, all right? We're going to combine at less than 20% moisture. All right? But these visual clues and knowing the biology of these plants, the way we do with corn and soybeans, it's going to add a lot, I think, to profitability and productive. Okay?
So you're not looking, sorry.
Yeah.
You're not looking at, on them oats, you're not looking at that head, actually.
So kind of no smoke without, no smoke without fire. So you can pinch the kernel, you can see how it is. At 35% moisture, you're going to put a little dent in with your thumb, but not much more than that. But again, that cue is that area under the seed head, and it's how tan those glooms are. Yeah. All right? Because the plant at that point, when that's tan, they're not taking up water and nutrients. They're just sitting there waiting for you to harvest them. Right? That's the time to swath them. Yeah. Okay, so we saw this at the beginning, right? And I think we need to rethink what we think about these relationships as farmers. Right? So economic opportunity really shapes our decisions, and so does the climate. And I think they feed through this filter that I call farmer perceptions, right? How we see the world and how we manage crops. This is what affects this. So if we can do a better job at changing this, I think we can change these decisions. All right? So we ask questions. We use surveys too. We survey farmers because we want to know what they're thinking. So we ask them about production and profitability constraints. All right? Lots of different things. The top 3 that they selected were too much mid-season rain, delayed planting date, and annual weed pressure. So let's think back to these, right? We got no control over this. Delayed planting date. We have some control over that. Not all the control. I understand you don't want to get out there when things are wet, but we have more control than I think we do. Annual weed pressure. We just heard about weeds. We heard about the things we can do. Are we doing a good job in our other cropping sequences of getting that weed pressure down so it's not a big deal in our small grains year? Okay. So these are just takeaway questions I just want you to think about. We don't answer them today, but they're things for us to all think about. Right? How much thought and energy do we put into small grains production? Right? Do we treat our small grains like we treat our corn and soybeans? Right? Do we make an effort to control all the factors that we can? Right? So as you start planning for this spring small grain production, these are things to think about. All right? This is the small grain season. It's complicated. It's just like any of those other crops, right? We got things before to think about. Preceding crop, variety, drill calibration, fertility, planting depth, mid-season, stand, press scouting, right? What are we going to do? All the things we have to think about mechanically. It's a lot to think about, I know. All right? Let's get back to this. So I think at some point farmers knew a lot more about growing oats in Iowa and the Midwest, right? But we have less and less oats around. So what does that mean? What have we lost? So we lose local mills and that kind of decentralized milling infrastructure. That's gone, right? There are fewer and fewer seed cleaning machines out there. It's hard to get those. I don't know about you guys up in South Dakota and North Dakota. I know guys in Iowa that drive all the way up to you guys to get equipment, right? It's hard for us in the Midwest down here, right? Swathers, that's another thing. Guys are driving all over the place to get swathers. They're just not around anymore, and I think they're good tools. Right? So it's loss of associated infrastructure. So the one picture that I can't put up there that I think is the most important thing that we've lost is knowledge infrastructure. We've lost a lot of knowledge of how to raise a good small grain crop in the lower Midwest. Right? So I don't think it's all a bad thing. I think we can get here. Right? So I like working with farmers, and I think so far farmers have enjoyed working with me. And I think we've picked up some decent tips that we can share with everybody as to becoming more profitable in small grains production, right? But it's not just going to take farmers and researchers, right? It's going to take markets and industry support. So dealing with our brokers, dealing with Organic Valley, dealing with these people that can make a difference, right? We should be feeding more small grains in our rations. We can feed animals more than corn and soybeans, and it's probably pretty good for those animals, right? Okay, so I have a lot of people that I can't thank because they're not here, but we worked with 50 farmers over 3 years. My advisor is Mary Wiedenhoff. She's a professor at Iowa State. She's been a big help. Also work with Margaret Smith, who's in value-added extension as a farmer in New Hampton, Iowa. These are some other folks in my lab, and I wouldn't have been able to do this work without them. As was mentioned in the beginning, OCIA was actually instrumental in helping us out with a little micro grant 2 years ago. Helped me get through a little slump in that. I've also gotten funding from SARE, Iowa State, the Iowa Organic Association, and the big funding has come from the Ceres Trust, which organizes organic research in the Midwest. So I'm going to leave this up here. These are just good resources, and I would really encourage you all. The slide set's going to get out to everybody. I think it's going on the website. PFI has a full small grain site. We've made videos with them. We've done all sorts of good stuff that are really user-friendly, right? University of Minnesota, Organic Risk Management. Canadian organic growers, I got to say, they know what they're doing up there. They're doing a good job with organic production. It's a guy in New York, Klaas Martens, and this is that seeding rate calculator. So if you got any interest, this will be freely accessible. You can write it down right now. I think I've gone over my time, but I wanted to give enough time. If there were questions, I'd attempt to answer some of them.